This is the Nintendo Wii, and oddly enough, this might be my second most repaired system alongside the Xbox 360. Some weeks I would repair more Wiis than the 360. However, I never really had to repair a board issue on this system. It's a pretty durable system when it came to the chipset and the board. Not so much when it came to the audience they targeted and then the disk drive on the front being slot loading with no guard, but we'll be getting into that as we take this thing apart. Instead, I kind of wanted to check this system out inside and maybe take a look at how Nintendo managed to make this system so small, because if you look at it compared to systems in that same generation, it's downright tiny. Even compared to the previous generation with the GameCube and the PS2, and the Xbox, it's still very small, and while the PS2 Slim came out and is technically smaller than this, that also didn't have a fully loaded disk drive that is completely slot loading. Instead, that had kind of a flip up top that you had to do everything else. So today, let's take a look at what was probably one of the biggest shifts in terms of Nintendo's marketing strategy and the audience they targeted, and probably the most, I guess, successful console at this point, because they won that generation with what's essentially a GameCube. Okay, now I say it's a GameCube. Technically, it's not completely a GameCube. See, what's weird about the Wii is while it is technically sharing a similar chipset, we really didn't know much information about the Wii. Nintendo really never told us about it. In fact, the only times we got any kind of information about specs in this system were through press leaks or people reverse engineering, X-raying it, all kinds of stuff that they could try to do to figure out what was in here, because Nintendo didn't want to say anything about specs because they weren't competing with specs. Instead, they were competing with a controller that looked like this and the mainstream that latched onto it. And if you don't believe me, the audience that latched onto it was definitely a casual audience. Look at something like Wii Party that outsold games like Twilight Princess and games like Skyward Sword. Look at Wii Play, which outsold games like Animal Crossing and Smash Bros. Brawl combined. That one actually outsold Mario Galaxy and Smash Bros. Brawl combined. Yeah, Wii Play did that. So it was pretty clear who their audience was. So why don't we take this thing apart, and I'm going to show you around it, and hopefully we can even take a look at the GPU and the CPU, something that a lot of people haven't really ever seen before. We're going to attempt to de-lid these, actually, and see what we can find. So the first way in is you pretty much want to start popping these doors off. See, back then, it actually had full backwards compatibility, which was really cool. You start at the top, and you'll get 3 of these black screws. The front one is much longer than the other 2, because the front one actually holds the faceplate on the front as well, and it kind of acts to hold on to the top part, because once you take that off, you can see it starts to kind of pop its way out. And this will come off, and we'll get this full top part off. This is where you plug in your GameCube controllers and your GameCube memory cards, because it did have full GameCube backwards compatibility, something that they did remove in the later model. So if you want a Wii, I definitely recommend getting this model that has the doors that open up, and you can plug in all of your peripherals there for the GameCube, because eventually they took it out. I know they went to like blue and pink and black models, and at that point you just got to check the top to see if the doors are there, because if they're not, you're not getting the GameCube backwards compatibility, and that's kind of a shame, because that was such a cool feature for it. Because it just worked. You popped your GameCube game in, and it started up, and it acted just like a GameCube, which was great. Couple of tri-wing screws, because yes, we were in full effect with tri-wing drivers here, and again, you guys know this by now probably if you've been watching. I don't like tri-wing screwdrivers, or screws. They're just really annoying. A couple of what I guess you could call warranty checks, warranty stickers here. The pads, you have stickers here, there's stickers on the other side, but there's no actual warranty sticker that you break that tells them you've been in here. In fact, if you replace everything as you should and all the screws in the right spots, they would never know you even worked on this thing, which was weird at the time, because I would work on these all the time, and I realized after people started bringing them in and taking them home that Nintendo would never know that I worked on these things, like, at all. As long as I did everything right, put everything back, they could technically still probably go through Nintendo's warranty if they really wanted to, but a lot of people just wanted to get it done because the kids wanted to play it for the weekend and they didn't want to wait weeks. So they would come in and, well, they would just get it all done there. I like to take these stickers, by the way, when I do take them off, and actually stick them right next to where I pull them from. That way they don't get lost or anything, and they stick pretty well. So usually I'll go around, and as I remove them, I'll just pop them right next to it. That way you know where it is, and it won't go anywhere, and they lift back up pretty easily. Now we work around to the bottom Again, tons of stickers here. We do also have our little battery here that keeps time and whatnot on it. It keeps it kind of powered for that. Once you remove this, it'll reset its clock and everything, so you'll have to go back in and do that, and you pretty much have to do it to get inside of this system because it has the main screw underneath that holds, again, part of the front faceplate on. And it does get kind of confusing, I will admit this, to start removing all these screws, as they have Phillips, they have shorter black Phillips screws at the top, they have longer Phillips. They have all kinds of different screws just on the outside. When we get inside, this thing becomes an absolute mess. Like, there are so many screws on a system that is so tiny. It is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I have no idea why that's the case. But again, I guess they wanted to make sure everything was solid inside, because it really doesn't break when it comes to the chipset. It's mostly just the disk drive. Okay, everything's now out. This guy will just pull straight off. It is plugged in. So that just unplugs. That was the only reason it really had this plug here, was because if you remember, this would actually light up blue on the outside. That would happen if you had like a message or something. This slot would actually light up blue, and I only saw that happen a couple times. If you remember, the Switch is supposed to have something similar around its home button, but we have never really seen that come on unless you plug it into to your PC, which was so weird to see that. Bluetooth module is actually right here at the front. That's actually not a bad spot for it, because there is a lot of steel inside, so they put it as close to the front with the antenna here to connect to your controllers and everything else. So it makes sense to have it there where there's no real blockage outside of just plastic, which doesn't really mess with the signal at all. So that's a good spot for it there. And then this guy just starts to pull right apart. Since we've grabbed everything out of there, it should just pretty much lift right out, and you pretty much open it up just like that. And I did actually drop the vent off. This was annoying. There's a filter in there. You can already see there's a lot of dust. This filter is something you want to clean. You can usually just take a paper towel to it and just wipe it off, and you'll get a lot of that out there. But they did put a filter in right at the bottom here, just to try to kind of keep it clean inside, and it never works because it's still got dusty in here. So we have our main shield here. This is actually screwed in by those Phillips heads that we already removed. In fact, if you don't remove the Phillips heads, this will actually just go right with this guy. And here we are, we're looking directly at the inside of the system now. That's our drive. This is the thing that's always a pain. But what's really good about this, we would call this is essentially called a dumb drive. And I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that. The disk drive itself on a 360 or a PS3, they have motherboards that go with the drives, right? So it's at the bottom, and actually with these are a little wider, so I can actually switch over to a wider Phillips head. They have boards that go with the drive, and it tells the drive what to do when the motherboard, the main board, is working, and that's how it all communicates together. But what's really good about the Wii, you don't need to keep the drive the same across motherboards, which was actually really cool, because if there was a drive that was malfunctioning, we would order a brand new drive, right? If it's not reading and all this stuff, because eventually the drives, these things, got cheaper than the laser itself. It was very, very weird situation. I don't think companies wanted to keep pulling the lasers out because it's a real annoyance to do so. So you would actually just be able to lift this guy up, as I just did those 4 screws. This would pop off just like this, and then it would just go to the side, and a new one would come right back on. It was very easy, and it worked well. You wouldn't get banned online, nothing. This and this do not seem to ever be tied together. I never experienced that, and it worked well. Just got a new drive, dropped it on, and we called it a day. It was much easier. But if you do want to get inside of this thing, this board has to come off. There's a metal shield here. This sticker comes off. That's your laser right there. This has to come up and come out. You have your, I believe this was your actual arm. This is your sensor on top. So when you put a disc in, it uses like some IR light here to see when the disc is coming in. It grabs it, pulls it in, and then it starts reading. And that's how all of that works. And on the bottom here, this is actually the spindle that then spins the disc and everything. So there's a lot going on here. Keep that in mind. This drive is actually pretty serious, and you can kind of see how wide it is. In fact, most of this system is the disk drive, which is really funny. This is probably the most complicated part about this whole system, is this disk drive. And people would jam all kinds of stuff. Popsicle sticks, DS games, trading cards, coins, you name it. I probably took it out of one of these drives. The good news though, if you just have something stuck in here, the drive isn't hard to open. See, you come across here, you have Phillips head screws all across the top. So let's say some trading cards got jammed in here, or a DS game. A lot of times you'll open this up just like this with these screws on top, and it'll lift right up, and you can just start grabbing at whatever's in here. It's ledged on the side here, and then it'll lift up, and then you can start getting to whatever you need to. So let me actually lift this up. And then this kind of just opens up like that. You can grab whatever you need to out of there. You may have to do a reset on it, which is really annoying, and it actually involves having to spin this guy until it resets. But a lot of times, if you get the stuff out, you close it back up, as long as you didn't mess with settings, usually it would work fine after that. But having to mess with these drives beyond that was such a pain. And honestly, the disk drives, they're probably still online, and they're probably still really cheap, but I remember ordering these disk drives straight up, and they were like 23 bucks. So you can kind of see why we stopped messing with the drives as much when people were just like, yeah, drop a new drive in there and let's call it a day. It was just a million times easier. And even now, because I know these systems can be modded super easy, and some people might just want to put a new drive in there after they've modded it, right? And just have a brand new drive with a fully modded system, because these really are, I think, one of the best systems to mod in terms of homebrew. The homebrew scene around the Wii is still really, really good, and it's pretty cool to see that. Now that we've had this all done, let's take a look around the rest of the system so you can kind of understand how the Wii generates airflow and kind of cools itself off. Right here is where I really don't like going further than this. I'm going to show you why. It becomes a nightmare when you start getting inside of this Wii. Because we haven't even scratched the surface about getting inside. But I told you we're going to take a look at the GPU and the CPU. But at this point, you're pretty much good, because I wouldn't have to go any further than this since most of the work was done in that drive. But on the back, we have our fan, and the fan would blow air out. It would pull air out. We have actually a very large aluminum finned heatsink here. We have our Wi-Fi antennas right here rolling into the system. And at that point, I would not want to do much more, but we're going to, because I actually want to show you a big pile of screws when this is all done. I want to show you how many screws it actually takes to get the motherboard out of the system. Ready for this? Yes, these are all the screws they end up with right here when it's all done. All this mess right here is just from getting the smallest system at the time apart. Yeah, these are just for the board. You have those case screws, the clips, the stickers, everything else over here. So you end up with a massive mess. I still need to unscrew the heatsink. And it's amazing how much actually went into the Wii, which was originally thought of as being very, very simple. It's actually an extremely complicated system when you get inside. Now we have a couple of other accessories here that has to be unplugged. That's our Wi-Fi chipset here. This actually just comes right off like that. It's a plug-in, so it just pops in. I've noticed a few errors take place when this is loose or just completely missing or just off. I don't think it can actually boot without this Wi-Fi chipset, or at least boot without an error. And that's actually reminds me similar to the DS Lite. I think that had the same issue where it couldn't boot. I noticed similar issues without this Bluetooth module. Even if the Bluetooth module was on there and it was kicking back an error, it would actually prevent the system from starting up, from what I remember. But your Bluetooth module is similar. It actually is just a plug-in and it just pops right off. So that's pretty straightforward as well. And actually what's nice is at this point, we can start looking at the board after I move all of this stuff out of the way. It's amazing how much more complicated the system is after you get inside from looking at it from the outside. Let me know if you would have assumed if the Wii had this much stuff going on just from looking at the outside, because they packed this thing full of all kinds of material that I don't think really needed to be there, but they added it anyway. And getting to these screws in the back is probably the worst. We're actually just about done getting all these screws out, and we can start looking at the motherboard with the chipset and everything, which is nice because that means we're almost done with all that. And we have all of our, let me see if this comes off, there we go. We have our chipsets here where they actually used thermal pads. I don't even know if that one was even on correct. It was not. Somehow that ended up over there on the incorrect part of the thermal pad, which is weird. So I just moved it back. So these right here are our two chipsets. We have, of course, two different ones. Actually, I think it'll come off now, by the way, because I think the screws we're through. Yes, that's the one nice thing about this I'll give them credit for. Those screws that I was unscrewing there actually go through the board, and it has a full metal backplate on the back to kind of keep everything like straight. But you can see how much stuff I have now piled up here, all over here as well. There's stuff everywhere right now, just to get this Wii apart. So, the good news is, we can actually look at our chipsets now. Yay. So, I'm going to give you guys a picture of it here. So, the system itself, the CPU was a PowerPC-based Broadway processor, and that was made on a 90 nanometer chipset. And that apparently is clocked at 729 megahertz. We don't really know. That's the thing. It's a lot of guesstimates and people trying to figure it out. And then the GPU is ATI's Hollywood GPU. That's also on a 90 nanometer process. Again, reportedly clocked at 243 megahertz. We don't really know 100%. 88 megabytes of main memory with 24 megabytes. So they did kind of split it up. 24 megabytes was set up for the graphics package, and then 64 megabytes was just set up as GDDR3 SD-RAM for the system to use. So they had an okay process going there. Definitely a bit of a step up from the GameCube, but not a massive step up. And now we're going to attempt, I say attempt because we'll see how this goes. I've never actually had to remove the heat spreaders on these, and that's going to be very interesting to see how that goes. I have a tool here that I generally use to remove heat spreaders on systems like PS3s, so I'm going to attempt to use it on these two and see if we can actually take a look at what the chipsets look like. So that came off fairly easily. I think I kind of slipped there and hit that. This Wii was actually bricked, so I really didn't care too much. I got it super cheap because it was bricked. So I really wasn't planning on it doing much other than this, but I think I actually might have hit one of the fuses over here, but now you can kind of look to see where, because usually there's glue around the edges here, and that's generally where you have to cut in. And honestly, once I cut in on this side, it was pretty easy to do it. If I had to do it again, I probably would have started probably over here in this corner. But once it started popping up, it was good to go. Again, this thing was bricked and I got it super cheap, so I wasn't even thinking to use it beyond this video. But it's an interesting look at that. I'm gonna pop this one off too, and then we'll get like a really close picture of it so you can see what they look like without the actual heat spreaders on them. So you can see this one is actually coming up a bit easier. This one, I think because there's so many spaces, it started to pop in and everything. Generally, this isn't too bad. Usually I'll have like a diagram next to me looking to see where any of the important fuses are on top. And a lot of times I'll use this for like PS3s and everything. This is actually the first time I've really used it on a Wii to try to figure it out. But this one is actually coming up a bit easier. In fact, I can basically almost get my fingernail under there to work it up. But I'm going to keep working around. Usually I use this just to cut in on the different glue that's underneath. And at that point, I can usually wiggle it free. But again, I'm being less careful because I don't care as much about this Wii that I wasn't planning on fixing anyway. This was more for this video, whereas normally it would take me a while to work around a PS3 cell CPU. This one I don't care about as much. I just wanted to see what it looked like. This one actually had no fuse underneath, so that was actually much easier. And you can see how small these are. I have to give them credit though, because probably these didn't generate a ton of heat. The compound underneath is still pretty much intact completely. So the Wii usually had a pretty quiet fan, and a lot of that had to do with probably the heat transfer being pretty solid. Let me give you a straight picture of these two with the heat spreaders next to them so you can get a good look at them. So there's two different chipsets here. There's the smaller one, which is the CPU, and then the larger one is that Hollywood GPU. And what's interesting about that is it also has an ARM 926 core, which if I'm looking at it, I assume that's that very small die kind of in the top right. And apparently people have nicknamed it Starlet. It's unofficial, because again, Nintendo didn't really talk much about this, but it's designed to really work with things like wireless functionality, USB, the optical drive, just different functions around it. And keep in mind, we also had that Wii Connect 24, so when it went into standby mode, it used that ARM chipset when it was in low power mode because it didn't really want to draw a lot of power. However, one thing I noticed is whenever it was in that Wii Connect 24, when it was kind of off with the yellow light, it would get very hot. So I don't really know how good of a job that actually did. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the original Wii. It's much more complicated inside than I think most of us would have assumed just looking at it from the outside, and I guess it just goes to show you can't really judge a console until you open it up and take a look. But the Wii, for being the weakest in the generation, I think is also one of the most complicated to take apart. So there you go. The Wii, while again it's not the most powerful, is fairly interesting actually inside. Let me know what you guys think about the Wii after seeing it inside. Is this something you would have wanted to have worked on back in the day? Again, if you get down to the drive, it's not really too hard. It's even getting in though, there's so many different screws. You got a tri-wing, you got a Phillips, you got all different sizes. But if it's just the drive, so if you have something stuck in your drive and it's not operable, getting to this point is not too difficult, or if your disk drive stops reading, changing this drive out with a new one because maybe you've modded it is also very easy to do, and you can just literally swap it right out. It's pretty easy. But let me know what you guys think about the Wii. Thanks guys for watching. Make sure you like the video if you liked it, dislike if not, and I'll see you guys in the next video.